Hello, all. Happy Tuesday. Sorry about there being no video yesterday. I forgot on Friday that was Canadian Thanksgiving, and then I was going to pre record on Sunday, but as you know, we're moving, and so we checked out a few houses over the weekend, and one of them had one of those Glade, I don't know if it was a candle or a plug in, but it just killed me. I have issues with chemical fragrances, and so I immediately felt my throat kind of closing and everything kind of swelling up, and I got out of there as fast as I could, but I was sort of um, not in a state to record. You might still hear it in my voice that I'm froggy. And then it was okay, well, I'll just do it today. Oh, today's Thanksgiving. So here I am, I'm back. It's Tuesday. And like I said, I wanted to do continuing stuff from last week because there were a lot of comments and a lot of strong feelings. I mean, my Facebook on Saturday night was like a freaking funeral. People were acting like the world was ending. And that's what's kind of nice about being older and having been a teenager when the Anita Hill thing was going on. Um, the you get this sense of perspective that things do go on and um, just certain things hit different people, like in the in the news. um, Certain things hit some people harder than others, and all you can really do is get through. And if you're wondering what this is, I know, segue, mosquito bite. But Yeah, people were commenting, sending me comments saying, what do we do now, what happened, this. It's one of those things where there were real stakes, and people were playing this up as a test of the Me Too movement and everything like that. Whole bunch of stuff that's actually a bunch of nonsense. If you study history, especially the various waves of feminism, um, they tend to be bookended by defeats or by denial of rights. The first wave's a bit tricky because there are different conditions in Britain than they were in America. But in America, it was tied to the Quaker revival movement. Oh, before I forget, commercial break. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/Leanna K. I greatly appreciate the people who have come on board this month because of Lady Bits and the boss fight stuff. Don't forget that if you become a patron, you're going to be part of the boss fight planning. And that is going to continue. It's already started, but that is going to continue on Thursday's video. But like I said, the first wave of feminism actually got started through the religious revival movement. And there was something called the Seneca Falls Convention, and there's a Declaration of Sentiments. And the only one that was even remotely contentious to the assembled people was women's right to vote. And the reason that was contentious may not be what you think. Quaker men in general did not vote, so they didn't know why women had to get it in their head that they needed to do that dang fool voting. Quakers at the time believed that voting was putting the will of man over the will of God. The rule. God rules everything, so we don't need to vote. God will take care of everything. And so that one was the one that became controversial. So, of course, that one women's voting franchise became the key goal of first wave feminism. Suffrage became the thing. The interesting thing about first wave is how much of it was punctuated by comedy, especially up here in Canada. The suffrage movement here decided to campaign through humor. And I think we could go back to that more now, please. Maybe more on that in a bit. But then the second wave, of course, was spurred on by during World War II, they had a labor shortage, so they did the whole "you can do it, ladies, go out and work." And women decided they liked working, and because women had to work, a lot of these conveniences made housework a lot easier. Things like TV dinners and no wax floors and things like that. And then women realized, wow, I don't have to wax my floor every day or every 3 days. Some of you are going, what's a waxed floor? Exactly. They don't exist anymore. But even when I was a kid, I remember my mother waxing our floor. She'd put down this wax and then get out this big buffer thing that I don't know what it was called, but I called it the Zamboni because it's Canada and hockey. But yeah, she would actually do that. She would actually buff the floor. She would wax and buff the floors. But more things made housework easier. The prepared food industry also started coming up, and women suddenly went, whoa, our entire day doesn't have to be housework and childcare. And then the war ended and the men came home. And all of a sudden that sort of Betty Crocker lifestyle, that Leave It to Beaver lifestyle, started becoming this propagandized thing that pushed women out of work and back into the home in the 1950s. And it only took about a decade for women to realize, we don't like this. We like having our own money. We like having a life outside of our kids. And it's interesting. It reflects in everything from architecture to the types of commercial foods that the section of the Feminine Mystique, Betty Friedan's book on cake mixes was fascinating. Cake mixes were a way to stop women from buying store-bought cakes so they'd spend more time in the kitchen. Because this idea that, oh, it's a mix, so it's easier, but you still have to add your own eggs, milk, and so on. Oh, it's better it tastes better at home. It was a middle ground, and there were all these tactics that were used to make housework take longer to fill a woman's day. And that regression led to second wave feminism, because the big things there were Roe versus Wade and the right to safe and legal abortions, and the right to work, equal pay, Title IX, stuff like that. And they got quite a bit of progress, and then the feminist sex wars started that are still going on to this day, and everything sort of splintered. Anita Hill started the third wave in earnest. And what happened to her gave enough women, enough people in general, a common cause. We don't want a woman to ever have to go through the humiliation and character assassination that Anita Hill did. And obviously, collectively, the world failed on that point, but they did a lot of other things. The interesting thing was that first and second wave were all sort of women as a class, that very Marxist women as a class idea, rights for all women. The third wave was different in that it was about rights for individual women, trying to get that first CEO, trying to get that first female manager, that first female engineer, first female physicist, that sort of thing. It was kind of a token. Hey, if we get one woman through the door, then other women will get through the door. That didn't really work. And so now I can see the Kavanaugh hearing, the Christine Blasey Ford testimony, becoming the spark that is going to officially light the tinder of the fourth wave. Now, some people have already said the fourth wave happened with the internet. I disagree. I don't think you can have a completely online phenomenon. I think that what is going to happen now, this is just my social prediction, but what I think is going to happen now is that various groups are going to stop fighting each other and get together around this idea that, now we can't just have a few women. A few women in token positions, representation. We need enough. We need sort of a critical mass of women in higher level decision making positions, management, C-suite, that kind of thing. And that's what I think is really going to define the fourth wave, kind of an in between the collectivism of the first and second wave, that people power, women as a class of the first and second wave, and the individualized approach of the third wave. I think this is going to be a correction, and it's going to be, that's great that, Dianne Feinstein and I think two other women. Yeah, because Kamala Harris was on the Judiciary Committee, and blanking on her name, Amy Klobuchar, there you go, was on the Judiciary Committee. But they were all Democrats, and they were in the minority. And so I think what's going to happen now is, no, you need women on both sides of the aisle. We need Republican women on that committee, because this keeps happening. And that's no guarantee that the result would be any different. It was just the bizarre grotesquerie of watching them bring in a female prosecutor to ask their questions, because they, the Republicans didn't want the attack ads of what, people got out of the Clarence Thomas hearings. I mean, Joe Biden's ongoing aspirations are apparently hitting a snag because of his involvement in the Anita Hill debacle. And that's kind of interesting, because that's always something that's bugged me about Biden, is he's gotten a pass on what he did there. He's seen as this champion for sexual assault survivors and women's rights, but he was there. He was, in a sense, complicit. Now, the clip the Republicans keep using was taken out of context, yes, but I don't think he did right by Anita Hill. And it was beyond that. Like, for people like me, old enough to have lived through it, it was an entire media thing. They never ran a photo of Anita Hill where she was smiling. She was always looking angry, like enraged, her face kind of contorted. They did the same thing to Condoleezza Rice when she was Secretary of State. So, I mean, this is going to galvanize people in a way. I'm not quite sure where it's going to go, but I think that will be it. The idea that we are no longer satisfied with just a couple of token women in decision-making positions. We need a significant number of people, so that, people like Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski aren't expected to be the votes for all women everywhere. They're still Republicans. Well, Murkowski's technically an independent, but they're still Republicans. They're two votes among the Republicans. The fact that they were targeted for being yelled at and threatening to primary Susan Collins or fund her Democratic opponent when she comes up for re-election. She was one vote. She was one vote in 50 votes. And she's been targeted because she's a woman, among other things. How could you do this to your own kind? That's not how Republican women see it. And I think that's another thing that we're going to have to address better. The idea that women aren't a monolith. I mean, when you start talking about female voters, female voters as a block is non-existent. There's a huge division between white non-college educated women and everybody else. And that's just for starters. Then you break down Black women voting habits differ from Latina women voting habits, college educated white women voting habits. Women are not one thing. And, they don't talk about men as voters. They'll talk about white men, but it's usually college educated whites versus non-college educated whites and things like that. But then you talk about the women vote. And that is because of the collectivism of the first and second wave. But I think we're going to be moving away from that. And hopefully we will start moving towards the idea of women as individuals, and that gender isn't so important. Um, Gender does not define what you like. Gender does not define what you can be. Many other factors factor into that. So, to people who are like, what do we do now? We lost. There's a little history lesson for you. Waves of feminism tend to start with a loss, and they tend to end with a loss, quite frankly. But the third wave just kind of fizzled out. But yeah, they sort of end with a loss of momentum, and then there's a bit of a lull, and another one starts up again. It's sort of 10 years on, 10 years off. So odd numbered decades tend to be special, and even numbered decades tend to be special regressions. You know, the 60s into it was more the 70s was women's lib, and then the 80s was a backlash to women's lib, and the 90s was third wave. It was, you know, what they called intersectional feminism, even though it never really was. And then, you know, it regressed again in the 2000s, and now it's come roaring back. All right, I won't say it regressed. It sort of it radicalized and ended up in the internet in a way I don't think is terribly effective. And that's what I suggest you not do. I don't suggest you start screaming at people and taking it out on people and just attacking people for having opinions that are different from yours. Social action, civic engagement works best when it's issue driven and you figure out something that can be fixed and you go out and fix it. Screaming into the void about massive motherhood style causes, not motherhood actually being moms, but motherhood causes, meaning causes so big that it's a multi-generational problem and it likely won't be fixed anytime soon. Therefore, both activists and politicians don't have to make any hard choices. That's what a motherhood cause is. So pick small things. Help get a local politician elected, a local counselor, a school trustee, if you're still in a place that has them, stuff like that. You know, help a woman run for mayor, help a woman run for state or provincial politics, things like that. Start small, start local, and fight battles you can win. And be proactive instead of it being all identity and just, I'm good, you're bad. Actually find a candidate that you can believe in and help them. They'll appreciate it. You'll learn a lot about the world in the process. I was actually getting involved with an organization to elect women to Toronto City Council, and then that, I don't know if you guys in the US followed this, if you saw it at all, but we had this crazy thing where our provincial government intervened and cut the number of cut the number of city council seats right on the day that the registration deadline ended, which meant a lot of people who weren't incumbents lost their right to run because they didn't know what to do. And that involved a lot of young female, that included a lot of young female candidates, because all of a sudden, like, incumbents are running against incumbents because 2 seats became 1. And incumbents have a massive systemic and money advantage. So but I was going to help them with social media. I don't actually live in the city of Toronto proper. So I was just going to help them with some strategy and things like that. But yeah, that's the sort of thing you can do to get involved. You can agree to work phones. You can door knock, stuff like that. I don't recommend door knocking for gamers because we're not the most extroverted people in the world, but it could be good for you. If you're only slightly introverted instead of very introverted, you might enjoy door knocking. It could become a game. But there's plenty of things that you can do to get involved and feel like you're doing something, feel like you're helping things to go in the right direction, and not get mired down in this petty, unpleasant, counterproductive, in my opinion, identity politics shrieking on Twitter and Facebook and other parts of the intertubes. That doesn't do much. Now, in a related thing with Lady Bits, there was quite a bit of interest on the comment I made um, about girls seeing a female character rescuing a boy as boy chasing and they don't like it. I actually even got contacted by an academic who wanted my source for this. And the problem is it wasn't an on the record comment. It was one of those quasi background things. It wasn't during the formal interview. It was just telling me because I was looking at the game and there was a back and forth. So, in terms of citations, I can't really divulge, like, it's not in an academic paper anywhere. This observation came from playtesting on all ages games where they tried some scenarios where a female character rescued a male character, and girls were they didn't think it made the girl seem like she was rescuing the boy. They felt like she was chasing after the boy. And there's a few reasons that this could be so. I'm not saying absolutely, but there are a few developmental reasons that this could be so. One is that when you get around 4, 6, 8 years old, kids start becoming aware of themselves as the very beginnings of an individualized identity. So they understand that boys are different than girls, and they either identify as a boy or they identify as a girl. And, some kids don't identify as their assigned gender, and that becomes a big political cluster. But, most kids are like, they match their anatomical gender, or their assigned gender. If you don't know what I mean by assigned gender, it used to be medical policy. I don't know if it still is. It varies from area to area, where kids that are born intersex, sort of undeterminate, whether, the genitalia is not completely a penis or a vagina. There's little vestiges of both. Often what doctors used to do is they thought it was best to perform like a normalization surgery, because they thought it would cause the kid less trauma. And what some people are starting to believe, or their lived experience is, they got assigned to the wrong gender. They got assigned, they're usually just assigned based on what surgery's easier, which doesn't necessarily mean that, that's how they're wired. So they ended up with the wrong genitals that match, who they are as a person. And so more and more there's a movement to allow intersex kids who have no discomfort or health problems from having non-binary genitalia to live as whatever they want until they're old enough to choose, or whatever their parents want, but they leave them intact. They don't operate, so that they can choose when they're older what feels right for them. And so, for those kids, it's totally different. But the majority of kids, it's you're a boy or a girl, and that starts to mean something. It means something in terms of positive identity, like I am a girl, but there is also an oppositional identity. I am not a boy. And then you get into toy gendering, and the patrons who've seen my my Sheridan College lecture on this, there's a new version that hopefully I will be able to get to record. It's hard to record college lectures because there's privacy concerns with the students, so I may just read it to you guys. But I do a whole thing on toy gendering and the fact that the toy store is basically organized into toys for kids, which are the whole store, essentially. And the packaging for gender neutral, or for boys and girls, is much more similar to the packaging for toys for boys. So there's, I have a picture, it's from Target. It says building sets and then girls building sets. So it's not boys building sets and girls building sets. It's actually treating girls as like this separate and different thing. And so girls get this identity of existing kind of in a pocket realm within boy kidhood. And so it becomes this, oh, that's a boy thing. I don't want that. And they always feel like, with Star Wars, for instance, Star Wars was seen as a thing for boys that then, oh, now it's for girls. But they're constantly the newcomer. In gaming, women are treated as newcomers. That's why it drives me crazy, because we're not newcomers. We've been here as, yes, as a minority, but there have been women making and playing games from the beginning. It's the same thing with comics. It's like people forget people like Ramona Fradon, who was an artist back in the day. I had the fortune to meet her when she was in Toronto at a convention, and she was really cool. She used to do like all these artist jokes, like she'd sneak things in like extra arms and legs and see if the editor noticed. But there were women in comics from the beginning, but it's not treated that way. And so there's this feeling that girls are constantly chasing boys. The thing that, like, I hated this as a kid. We had He-Man, and then, Teela and Evelyn were the female He-Man figures, not just one of the gang. No, that was the toy. You must want to play with this, right, little girl? I'm like, no. I want like Battle Armor He-Man and Battle Cat and Stinkor and the cool looking figures, not the girls that don't stand up. Cheetara didn't stand up either in the Thundercats, but Cheetara became cool. But then there was She-Ra, who was the spinoff from He-Man. So it's always like the boy thing happens first, and then the girl thing comes along as here, you can have your thing too, because you don't want to really play with this boy thing, right? And so there's this constant feeling that girls' stuff is lagging behind, is chasing boys. And so I can see where that leads to girls being not, I am going to be the hero that saves this helpless person. Girls interpret that as, those vestiges of conventional gender roles of, I'm rescuing this boy so he'll notice me. And the kind of romantic subtext, it isn't interpreted the same thing as the boy rewards the girl with friendship. The girl's rescuing the boy so they can be boyfriend and girlfriend, and they don't want anything to do with that. And so they're like, nope, that's boy chasing. No thanks. And this is just what they found in playtesting. And that's what happens when you actually don't just work in theory, you actually get real kids to play with things. And so game developers tried to do stories where girls rescued boys, and it didn't, it didn't appeal to little girls. You can't just transpose development things that way. The experience is different. The messages it sends are different. And the point of reference that kids have is different. Now, none of this applies to adult games, because by that point, by the time boys reach high school, they don't really care. It's much more important for women to have female playable characters than for boys to play as guys. At this point, it's apparently important for a majority of boys and girls to have female playable characters in a game, which is a very important threshold being crossed that developers should take note of. But hopefully that answers your question. That's my time for today. I will pick up tomorrow with more cool stuff. All right. Thanks for watching. And again, sorry about tomorrow.